Picture this. The government of Ontario just announced their latest economic projections showing a staggering $14.6 billion deficit for 2025, while unemployment rates climb to 7.5%. Yet behind these numbers lies a far more devastating truth. 10 cities across this province are hemorrhaging residents, businesses are shuttering their doors permanently, and entire communities are watching their futures slip away faster than anyone dares to admit. Which Ontario city will be the next to become a ghost town? Here's what they're not telling you. Number 10. Peterborough. The Kawarthas' so-called capital is experiencing what local economists are calling an industrial extinction event. This city of 83,000 people has watched General Electric's massive manufacturing facility downsize to a shadow of its former self, leaving behind a trail of unemployed skilled workers and empty commercial spaces that seem to multiply each month. What makes Peterborough's decline particularly shocking is how quickly it happened. Just 5 years ago, this was considered one of Ontario's hidden gems, a place where Toronto refugees could find affordable housing and decent employment. Today, the average home price has dropped 15% since 2023, but that's not because housing became more affordable. It's because nobody wants to move to a city where the largest employer might not exist next year. The ripple effects are everywhere you look. Lansdowne Street, once bustling with shoppers and diners, now has vacancy rates approaching 30%. Young graduates from Trent University pack their bags immediately after convocation, taking their degrees and ambitions to cities that can actually offer career growth. Even more troubling, the city's aging population means fewer tax dollars coming in just when infrastructure needs major upgrades. The lift lock might be a tourist attraction, but it can't lift this city out of its economic spiral. But here's what really keeps Peterborough residents awake at night. The city has put all its economic development eggs in one basket, hoping cannabis production and logistics companies will replace traditional manufacturing. The problem? Every other struggling Ontario city has the exact same plan. Number 9. Brantford. The telephone city is discovering that Alexander Graham Bell's legacy can't save it from 21st century economic realities. Brantford's transformation from industrial powerhouse to service sector-dependent community has left it vulnerable to every economic downturn, and 2025 is proving that vulnerability was well-founded. Here's the devastating truth nobody talks about. Brantford has lost over 12,000 manufacturing jobs since 2010, and those positions paid an average of $65,000 annually. The service sector jobs that replaced them? They average $38,000. That $18,000 difference isn't just statistics. It's the reason families can't afford their mortgages, why downtown businesses close one by one, and why the city's tax base continues shrinking. The Grand River runs through Brantford, but it can't wash away the reality of neighborhoods where for sale signs outnumber occupied homes. The city's proximity to Hamilton and Toronto should be an advantage, but instead it's becoming a disadvantage as anyone with transportation simply commutes elsewhere for work. Local business owners describe a death spiral. Fewer residents with spending power means less demand for services, which means more business closures, which means even fewer employment opportunities. What's particularly heartbreaking is that Brantford has invested millions in downtown revitalization projects, beautiful new facades on buildings that house struggling businesses serving a shrinking customer base. The city looks better than it has in decades, but appearances can't mask the fundamental economic problems beneath the surface. Trump's reaction was swift and punishing. On Thursday, October 23rd, he terminated all trade negotiations with Canada, calling the advertisement a serious misrepresentation and hostile act. When the ad ran again during Friday's World Series game between the Toronto Blue Jays and Los Angeles Dodgers, Trump imposed an additional 10% tariff on all Canadian goods while flying to Malaysia for the ASEAN summit. The economic impact was immediate. The Canadian dollar fell 2 cents against the U.S. dollar in weekend trading, energy stocks plummeted, and futures markets signaled significant disruption to cross-border supply chains. Ford quickly agreed to pull the advertisement, but the damage was done. Behind the political theater and market volatility lies a devastating human reality that neither Trump nor Carney adequately acknowledges. In Windsor, Ontario, automotive parts manufacturer Sarah Chen has laid off 40% of her workforce as tariffs make her products uncompetitive in American markets. Her remaining 60 employees face uncertain futures as customer orders continue declining. In Alberta, energy worker Michael Rodriguez saw his salary cut by 25% as oil and gas exports face increasing restrictions and tariffs. His mortgage payments haven't changed, but his ability to make them has. The ripple effects extend far beyond directly affected industries. Canadian retailers report that American suppliers are raising prices to offset tariff costs, pushing inflation higher for basic consumer goods. Healthcare systems in border communities struggle as medical device imports become more expensive. Universities face budget pressures as research partnerships with American institutions face new regulatory barriers. These aren't abstract economic statistics. They're families choosing between heating bills and groceries, students postponing education plans, and small businesses closing permanently. Every percentage point of tariff translates to real hardship for real people who had no voice in the political decisions that created this crisis. The Prime Minister's response to Trump's escalation reveals the fundamental weakness in his approach to this crisis. Carney continues speaking the language of international economics, emphasizing Canada's willingness to resume talks when the Americans are ready and stressing the mutual benefits of free trade. His background at the Bank of England and Bank of Canada taught him to communicate through carefully calibrated statements designed to influence market expectations. But Trump doesn't operate according to central banking principles or international trade law. He responds to political pressure, media narratives, and personal grievances. Carney's insistence on maintaining diplomatic decorum while Canadian communities suffer economic devastation suggests a leader out of touch with both the nature of his opponent and the urgency of his country's situation. His recent pivot toward Asian markets, including his attendance at the Malaysia-ASEAN summit alongside Trump, represents a long-term strategic shift that offers little immediate relief for affected workers and businesses. Meanwhile, Trump's tariffs continue extracting painful concessions from Canadian exporters while generating revenue for the American Treasury. The asymmetry in economic leverage becomes more apparent with each passing day. The limits of technocratic leadership. What makes this crisis particularly revealing is how it exposes the limitations of technocratic governance in an era of populist politics. Carney's entire career was built on the premise that expertise, data, and rational analysis could solve complex problems. As a central banker, he dealt with crises by adjusting interest rates, implementing quantitative easing programs, and communicating policy intentions to markets. These tools worked because financial markets operate according to relatively predictable principles and respond to credible commitments from respected institutions. Kingston's 132,000 residents are witnessing a slow-motion economic transformation that's leaving many behind, particularly in the traditional manufacturing and government sectors that once provided stable, middle-class employment. The closure of the Kingston Penitentiary eliminated hundreds of federal government jobs, and while the institution had negative associations, it represented steady employment for corrections officers, administrators, and support staff. More concerning, the federal government's ongoing efforts to reduce operational costs have targeted Kingston's various government offices for consolidation or elimination. Kingston's downtown, while superficially vibrant due to student activity, masks deeper economic problems. Local retailers struggle with the boom-bust cycle of the academic year, and many businesses that depend on student spending barely survive the summer months. Meanwhile, permanent residents face a housing market distorted by student rental demand, making home ownership increasingly difficult for families with local incomes. The city's proximity to Ottawa and Toronto should provide economic opportunities, but increasingly it means young professionals commute elsewhere for career advancement. Kingston becomes a bedroom community for people who work in larger centers, which limits local economic development and reduces the tax base available for municipal services. What's particularly frustrating for Kingston residents is watching smaller communities like Belleville attract manufacturing investments, while Kingston, with its superior infrastructure and educational resources, struggles to land significant new employers. Number 5, Sudbury. The nickel capital of the world is learning that global commodity markets can be ruthlessly unforgiving to communities that depend on resource extraction. Greater Sudbury's 166,000 residents are experiencing the harsh reality of an economy built around mining operations that increasingly rely on automation rather than human workers. Vale's operations, while still significant, employ thousands fewer workers than just a decade ago. The skilled trades positions that once provided solid middle-class incomes for generations of families are disappearing as technology replaces human expertise. When a mine maintenance worker earning $75,000 annually gets laid off, the impact ripples through every sector of Sudbury's economy. The city's attempts to diversify into healthcare, education, and technology face the fundamental challenge of geography. Sudbury's isolation, while perfect for mining operations, creates obstacles for businesses that need access to markets, suppliers, and skilled workers. The very distance that once protected the mining industry from competition now hinders efforts to build a more diverse economy. Laurentian University's financial crisis exemplified Sudbury's broader challenges. When a major institution faces insolvency, it signals deeper problems with the community's economic foundation. The university's struggles sent talented faculty and promising students elsewhere, creating a brain drain that will take years to reverse. Most troubling for long-term residents is watching their children leave immediately after high school or university, not for better opportunities, but because local opportunities simply don't exist. The community that raised them no longer has space for their ambitions and skills. Number 4, Hamilton. The ambitious city's ambitions are running headlong into harsh economic realities that threaten to undermine decades of revitalization efforts. Hamilton's 569,000 residents are discovering that being close to Toronto brings both opportunities and challenges, and in 2025, the challenges are winning. ArcelorMittal Dofasco's ongoing restructuring represents more than job losses. It's the potential end of Hamilton's identity as Steel Town. The plant that employed over 10,000 workers at its peak now operates with fewer than half that number, and automation continues reducing the workforce. Each eliminated position represents not just a lost paycheck, but a family forced to reconsider their future in the community their grandparents helped build. Hamilton's crime statistics paint a disturbing picture of a city under stress. The crime index of 55.8 reflects not just random criminal activity, but the social problems that emerge when economic opportunity disappears and social services become overwhelmed. Break-and-enter incidents have surged, and auto theft rates are climbing, signs that desperation is overtaking hope in too many neighborhoods. The housing market tells two different stories depending on which Hamilton you're discussing. In affluent areas near McMaster University or the downtown core, prices remain inflated by Toronto refugees seeking affordability. But in working-class neighborhoods historically tied to industrial employment, for sale signs linger for months, and property values stagnate or decline. What makes Hamilton's situation particularly complex is the ongoing tension between the city's industrial heritage and its aspirations for knowledge-based economic development. The very assets that made Hamilton prosperous, steel production, heavy manufacturing, and blue-collar employment culture, have become liabilities in an economy that increasingly rewards different skills and education levels. Number 3, Windsor. Canada's southernmost city faces the ultimate geographic irony, being directly across the river from Detroit's economic renaissance while experiencing its own prolonged decline. Windsor's 230,000 residents can literally see prosperity from their windows, but they can't access it without crossing an international border that's become increasingly complex to navigate. Windsor holds the dubious distinction of having Canada's highest unemployment rate, a statistic that reflects decades of automotive industry downsizing and the community's struggle to find a new economic identity. The closure of automotive plants eliminated thousands of jobs that paid well enough to support middle-class lifestyles, buy homes, and raise families with dignity and security. The casino, often touted as an economic development success story, actually illustrates Windsor's fundamental problem. Rather than creating wealth, it redistributes what little disposable income remains in the community, taking money from residents who can least afford to lose it. It's not economic development, it's economic extraction from a population that's already struggling. Cross-border commuting to Detroit jobs should be a solution, but post-9/11 security measures and the complexity of work visas make this option available to only a small percentage of residents. Meanwhile, the daily sight of Detroit's skyline serves as a constant reminder of opportunities that exist just beyond reach. What's most heartbreaking about Windsor's situation is the community's resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Local businesses continue operating despite reduced customer bases, community organizations work to maintain social cohesion, and residents support each other through difficult times. But resilience alone can't create the economic opportunities that would allow the community to thrive rather than merely survive. Number 2, Thunder Bay. The Lakehead city that once prided itself as Canada's grain capital is experiencing an economic transformation that threatens its very identity. Thunder Bay's 121,000 residents are watching their city's traditional role in grain handling and forestry disappear without clear alternatives emerging to replace those employment opportunities. Thunder Bay's port operations, historically the community's economic anchor, have been automated and downsized to the point where they employ a fraction of the workforce they once did. The grain elevators that define the city's skyline increasingly stand empty, monuments to an economic era that's rapidly disappearing. Each eliminated port worker represents not just a lost job, but the erosion of specialized skills and knowledge that took generations to develop. The forestry industry faces even greater challenges. Mill closures have become so routine that communities no longer react with shock, but with resignation. Environmental regulations, global competition, and changing market demands have made many operations economically unviable. The ripple effects extend far beyond the mills themselves, affecting truckers, equipment operators, and countless businesses that depended on forestry worker spending. Thunder Bay's geographic isolation, once an advantage that protected local businesses from outside competition, has become a liability in a globalized economy. The distance to major markets increases transportation costs, while the lack of connectivity makes it difficult to attract businesses that need access to suppliers, customers, and skilled workers. Most concerning is the brain drain accelerating throughout northwestern Ontario. Thunder Bay serves as the region's educational and healthcare hub, but increasingly, university graduates and young professionals leave immediately after completing their studies or training. The community invests in developing human capital but can't retain the benefits of that investment. Number 1, Oshawa. Motor City North is discovering that being synonymous with automotive manufacturing can become a curse when that industry undergoes fundamental transformation. Oshawa's 175,000 residents are living through the most dramatic economic transition in their city's history, and the outcome remains terrifyingly uncertain. The General Motors assembly plant closure didn't just eliminate thousands of direct jobs. It shattered the economic ecosystem that supported Oshawa for nearly a century. Part suppliers, tool and die shops, transportation companies, and countless businesses that served automotive workers have closed or downsized dramatically. The ripple effects continue spreading through every sector of the local economy. What makes Oshawa's situation particularly devastating is the speed of the collapse. Unlike communities that experienced gradual industrial decline over decades, Oshawa's automotive sector imploded in just a few years. Families that planned their futures around stable, well-paying manufacturing jobs suddenly found themselves with mortgages they couldn't afford on houses worth less than they paid. The housing market reflects this economic catastrophe with brutal clarity. Properties that once sold within days of listing now sit on the market for months. Neighborhoods that bustled with activity have become ghost towns where for sale signs outnumber occupied homes. The American dream of home ownership has become the Canadian nightmare of underwater mortgages and forced relocations. Durham College and Ontario Tech University provide some economic stability, but educational institutions can't replace the economic impact of a major automotive assembly plant. The challenge facing Oshawa is fundamental. How do you rebuild an economy when your primary industry has moved to Mexico and the workers who remain lack the skills needed for emerging sectors? What's most tragic about Oshawa's decline is how preventable it should have been. The city had decades of warning about automotive industry changes, but political and business leaders continued betting everything on an industry that was clearly transforming. Now, residents are paying the price for those decisions while watching their community collapse in real time. From Oshawa's automotive apocalypse to Thunder Bay's port decline, these 10 Ontario cities represent more than economic statistics. They're communities where real families are losing their homes, their jobs, and their hope for the future. The patterns we've seen repeated across the province reveal systemic problems that can't be solved with quick fixes or political promises. What do you think about these cities? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Which city would you choose to avoid and why? If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content.